Our Shir TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Barry and Rena Dubin In the zchus of refuah shlema for their niece Chava Tzipporah bas Chaya Malka. May she, together with Kol Yisroel, have a complete and enduring refuah. To thank Shmuel and Leba Dinovitz for dedicating the shiurim this month in memory of Shmuel's father, Harav Peretz, Avraham, Benyamin, Moshe, zechus. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, Neshama will have an Aliyas and the family a Neshama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Adam and Leslie Rosen, in the zchus of refuah shlema for Esther bas Sarah, and our day of learning sponsor, Mr. Suffness, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his beloved brother Matthew Suffness, Mutel ben Yosef zchus. We thank all of our sponsors for their incredible generosity. And I will say with that, let us begin with a very, very exciting daf ahead of us today. Today is Daf Kuf in Meseches Yevamos. So I will say we are picking up in Yirtzeh Hashem on Tzadik Tes Amud Beis 99b, and we're picking up at the Tanur Rabbanon 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. So I will say, if you remember again, in yesterday's Mishnah, we made a transition a little bit. We were focusing on cases of mixed up at birth, right? And focusing on the ramifications of that in terms of Yibum. At the end of yesterday's Mishnah, the last Mishnah on Amud Aleph, on Tzadik Tes Amud Aleph, the Mishnah on Tzadik Tes Amud Aleph, we shifted our focus a little bit away from Yibum ramifications to Truma ramifications. Remember again, we had the case ultimately of the Kohenes and the Shivcha who had their children mixed up. We weren't sure whose was whose. And the interesting discussion about Truma, specifically again, the whole idea about halacha l'maisa, whether or not ma'ala mit Truma liyuchsin, if you eat Truma, is that like your shtempel, right? If you see someone eating Truma, do we say that Truma consumption validates a person's genealogy? So therefore, if you're eating Truma, ultimately, again, that shows that you're a Kohen. We saw all of those machloksim, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda, good. Now, we're continuing on that theme a little bit, and this is really quite interesting. Tanur Rabbanon, Asara ein cholkin on Truma beis hagranas. We'll say there are 10 people who you do not disperse Truma to in the granary. So 10 people, if they show up, so we'll say, just understand historically, right? Where do you get Truma from? Right, so I'm a Kohen, I want some Truma. Where do I go? So the truth is, the ideal answer is nowhere, right? The ideal answer is people bring it to you, right? That's the ideal. That's the. But that being said, Kohanim would show up at granaries, at threshing floors, in order to go ahead and ask, not demand, but ask for their portion. So the Gemara now is saying is that there are 10 people, if they show up at the granary, we are not giving them their portion. 10 people, if they show up at the granary, we do not go ahead and give them truma. Who are they? Eluhain, cheresh, shota, v'katan. The first is a cheresh, deaf mute. Shota, someone who is deranged. Katan, a minor. Now, why is that? So, well, we'll see. Actually, we'll go through the list. Next is tumtum v'androgynous. So we'll say again, we thought we were done with tumtum and androgynous. They're always around. Right? So we'll say, so tumtum and androgynous. So remember again, tumtum, the individual again whose sexual organs are covered up with the membrane. Therefore, I can't tell the gender. Androgynous has the qualities of both male and female. Next, eved. So we'll say this goes back to yesterday's daf about a concern of giving out truma to an eved. I will say, is an eved entitled to truma? It depends. What does it depend on? Right? Who's his master? Obviously, we're talking about over here an eved who belongs to a Kohen. An eved who belongs to a Kohen is entitled to eat truma. Nevertheless, as we saw in yesterday's daf, if he shows up at the granary, we're not giving him truma without what? Without his master. Right? Excellent. His master has to be present. Right? We'll only give him truma in the presence of his master. Next, Isha, a woman. Now we'll say, Rashi says, who's the woman in question? Eshes Kohen, the wife of a Kohen. This is fascinating. And again, we're going to go through each of these, that if the wife of a Kohen shows up at the granary by herself, even though she's 100% entitled to truma, we do not go ahead and give her truma. Okay, RL. So we'll say, what's the RL? Uncircumcised Kohen. What's the case? Look at Rashi. 4 lines up from the bottom. RL, Kohen shemesu echav machmas mila. Why is the Kohen in RL? So we'll say this is the case of Mesu Echav Machmas Mila, the case of where you have a Kohen whose brothers died as a result of bris milah. See, today we diagnose this as hemophilia, right? So ultimately, again, Kohen brothers. So remember, there's a whole machlokes. Is it 2 brothers who died, 3 brothers who died? Leaving that aside, the point over here is this Kohen is uncircumcised, but not uncircumcised because he's derelict in the mitzvah of milah. Uncircumcised, why? Because the halacha says he has to remain uncircumcised. Now, the interesting part over here is that even though the Torah says, he's right, he can't have a milah. Can't have a milah. And ones rachmana patre. Normally, extenuating circumstances, you're exempt from a mitzvah. So while it's true that he does not have an obligation to do a milah, he is nevertheless considered what? An arel. This is interesting. Why? Well, so why is he considered an arel? Because arel is a physical state, right? If you have the arla, if a person has the foreskin, even if you have good reasons that it hasn't been removed, lemaisa, again, a person is an arel. A kohen who's an arel can't eat truma. Okay, next, tameh, straightforward. Kohen is tameh. Kohen is tameh. V'nosei isha she'eino hagenas, or a kohen who's married to a woman who is not allowed to be married to. Kohen's married to a grusha, right? He's married to a divorcee. Not allowed to be married to a divorcee, but he is. Therefore, we don't give him truma. So we'll say this is the list. This is the list. Sorry, this is the list. Good. So you must listen to this. V'kulan mishagrin lem lebateim. Now I will say, here's what's interesting. See, the people on this list, interestingly enough, are technically entitled to eat truma. Some of them. So there are those of them who, although we will not distribute truma to them at the granary, we will send them their truma home. So we won't, in other words, we'll say, what's happening over here is we won't allow them to collect in public, but we will go ahead and send them their truma portion to their home. Chutz, it's like like truma Uber Eats. We'll go ahead, right? We'll send it to their house. Chutz mitame, except for the kohen who's tameh, v'nosei isha she'eino hagenas lo, with the exception of 2, and again we'll see why. With the exception of a kohen who's tameh, with him we're not even going to send him truma to his house, or a kohen who's married to a woman who he's not allowed to be married to. In both of these cases, not only are we not dispensing to them truma from the granary, we're not sending it to their home as well. So we'll say, let's go through the list. Very exciting Gemara. So here we go. So bishlama chere shote v'katan lav b'nei adeninu. So I understand why we're not dispensing or dispersing. It's probably the better. Yeah, giving truma to the chere shote v'katan, right from the granary, from the threshing floor. Why? Because they're not b'nei deya. They don't have das. Then I will say, so what? Look at Rashi. Last Rashi on that. B'nei deya, v'zelusa de truma lechalek lahem begorin le'in kol. See, I will say, here's what's interesting. Is there anything wrong with a kohen who doesn't have das eating truma? Technically speaking, no. What's the problem? Truma must be treated with sanctity, and truma must be treated with respect. So the notion of giving something sacred to someone who does not have the das to care for it in a public fashion is considered to be a degradation to the truma. See, I will say, if you have something holy, part of having it is knowing how to take care of it. It's a good mussar with the Neshama as well. Kadosh Baruch Hu entrusted us with the Neshama, and He entrusted it to us because we have the das to be able to take care of it. So if truma is sacred, the idea of going ahead and giving truma to people who don't have das and therefore don't know how to properly care for it is considered to be demeaning to the truma. That's why, again, now you understand. So shcheri shot of a cotton. We're not going to give them true in public. What will we do? We'll send it home, right? We'll send it home to them, but Lemaise again won't give it to them in public. Good. So it says the Gemara, tumtum ba'androgynous namis. What's wrong with tumtum and androgynous? Top of kuf, beria bifne atzmaninu. So I will say, tumtum and androgynous, as we've seen, are ultimately beings unto themselves. Therefore, Rashi says, top of kuf, v'havya zelusa dekadshim. It's considered to be a degradation to Kadshim to give out truma to a tumtum and androgynous. Okay. Eved nami. Why can't you give truma to an eved in the threshing floor? Dilma asila asukim with truma liyuchsin. Yesterday's daf. What are we concerned about? If people see the Eved eating truma, see, I was saying, people don't necessarily know who an Eved is, who a Ben Chorin is. If people see an Eved eating truma, they could go ahead and make the assumption that what? This is a free man, not only a free man, but obviously he's eating truma, therefore what? He's a Kohen, and establish his yichus based on truma consumption, which obviously could be incredibly dangerous. Good. So the asuki mitruma liyuchsin. Next, arel v'tamei. What's wrong with an arel? Someone who's tamei. Mishum dema'isi. Now we'll say mi'isi literally means they're disgusting. Now what that just means is that there's physically something different about them. So we'll say the common denominator amongst all of these things is, aside from the eved, so far if you kind of take a look at cheresh, shota, katan, tumtum, androgynous, tamei, and arel, it's all because giving to these people, well, again, an Arel is not allowed to eat, Tommy is not allowed to eat, but they have other household members who can. But the Lamaisa, to give to them, ultimately is demeaning to Truma itself. Demeaning to Truma itself. Eved can't give to the Eved. Out of concern, if you give to him, it's going to be used to establish his yichus. Next, no se isha she'ena hogeneslo. What about a Kohen who's married to a woman who is not allowed to be married to? So mishum kinasa. That's a penalty. That's a penalty, which makes sense. In other words, Rabbi say, if a Kohen is married to a grusha, we as a community have a vested interest in what? In what? The dissolution of that marriage. What's the best way to turn the screws and ensure the dissolution of the marriage? Financially penalize him. So if you don't give him truma, that may be a way to force his hand. Next, Eli Isha, my time alone. Rabbi say, so everything on this list makes sense, but why not an Isha? So right, Isha's Kohen, the wife of a Kohen, shows up at the granary. Why can't we give her truma? So I'll say this is really fascinating. So the Gemara says, Pligi bar Rav Papa v'Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua. So there's a machlokes. What's the machlokes? Chad amar mishum grusha, the Chad amar mishum yichud. Fascinating. One said because of divorce, and one said because of yichud. I'll say, let's analyze. What does it mean, grusha? See, Rabbi say, look at Rashi, Mishum grusha, Shema yigar shena baila, v'hizara, v'lo yadi inshi upalgila. What are we concerned about? See, Rabbi say, when is an Eishes Kohen entitled to truma? When is she entitled to truma? When she's married. What's the concern? If we get used to going ahead and giving her truma, even in the event of divorce, she may continue to show up, and ultimately what? Continue to claim truma. And that's, of course, a concern. So that's one opinion. Other opinion says, yichud. See, Rabbi say normally, or I don't know normally, sometimes threshing floors were a little bit more out, in isolated areas. What's the concern? The concern is that if the Eishes Kohen comes to collect truma, she can get into a yichud situation. Remember again, yichud refers to the prohibition, ultimately, of a man to be alone with a woman. It applies to any woman who is an erva to you. So halacha l'maisa, again, this is the machlokes. So therefore, one says because of grusha, one says because of yichud. To which the Gemara says, okay, my benayu. So Rabbi say, okay, so sometimes Rabbi say, here's what we know. Everyone agrees that you do not dispense truma to an Eishes Kohen. Right? She has to come with her husband. Eishes Kohen. So what's the nafkamina? It's not between these two approaches. Interesting. Ikabenayu ki be dari demikrav lemasa v'lo shchichi b'hu inshi. So I will say one nafkamina could be a threshing floor that is close to the city, but people don't frequent it. So if it's close to the city, then what? We assume the proprietor of that threshing floor knows this woman, and therefore will know if she's divorced or not, since it's close to the city. But because people don't frequent it, there's still a problem of what? Of yichud. The Gemara says, Inami, the merchak u'shchich ba'inshi. Or the other possibility is a threshing floor that's far away from the city. So if it's far away from the city, the proprietor is not necessarily informed of the latest news. See, he's not going to know who's married, who's single. So therefore, als grusha, there's still a concern. But in terms of yichud, because there's a lot of people there, there's no concern. Okay, that's nafkamina. But I will say, but halacha l'maisa, again, see, here's what's interesting is at the end of the day, they're not disagreeing on the bottom line, which is that halacha l'maisa, we don't go ahead and dispense truma to an Eishes Kohen when she is by herself. Good. But yeah, we'll say we go on. V'kulam shagalim b'tayan chutz mitamei v'nosei isha she'en hogen eslo. So I will say, as much as this is a list of women for whom we do not go ahead and, not a list of women, a list of people, that if they show up at the threshing floor, we are not going to give them truma, okay? But lemaisa, we go ahead and we'll send truma to their homes, with the exception of tamei and nosei isha she'en hogen eslo. Right? Someone who's tamei and a kohen who's married to a woman he's not allowed to be married to. Now here's what's interesting. Aval arel mishagrinle. See, Rabbi say here's what's interesting. So I'm not going to send truma to the home of someone who's tamei, but I will send truma to the home of an arel. And Rabbi say, just so you understand, pretty much arel and tamei are what? They're kind of in the same boat. In other words, both of them represent physical disqualifications which preclude a kohen from going ahead and eating truma. Yet halacha l'maisa, one will do home delivery of truma, the other we won't do home delivery of truma. What's the pshat? So I'll say, listen to this. This is incredible. Aval arel mishagrinle, but arel we will send truma. Why? My taima mishum da'anis. Because Rabbi say in arel, remember again, Rabbi say, let's go back. What's the case of arel? What's the case of arel? Mesu echav machmas mila. This isn't a kohen chasron who doesn't care about the mitzvah of mila, but rather again, this is a kohen whose brothers died as a result of mila. So it's an ones. He can't have a bris, but he's an ones. Extenuating any circumstances. Therefore, we'll send him home truma. Says the Gemara, tame name ha'anis. But 1 second, tame is also extenuating circumstances. Also, how do you become tame? Okay, it's true, you can become tame intentionally, but you can also become tame. Chas v'shalom, somebody died right in front of you. Right, it just happened. Or you stumbled upon a grave, right, and you didn't even realize it. So Rabbi says, so tame is also ones. Rabbi say, this is incredible. Hi, nafish onse, v'hai lo nafish onse. So Rabbi say, listen to this. This guy, the arel, nafish onse means there's a lot of ones. The tame, there's not a lot of ones. Rabbi say, what does that mean? In the case of arel, the arel case, Rabbi say, represents a situation that is absolutely, unequivocally, and totally beyond your control. Right? In other words, the uncircumcised kohen, I will say, this has nothing to do with his level of vigilance or lack thereof. Lemaisa, again, this is a circumstance that has been visited upon him. Versus the case of tumah, as much as maybe at the end of the day, something happened that you were not anticipating, but the circumstances are not fully and totally beyond your control. Right? Lamaisa, you make the choice to go to the levaya, not go to the levaya. You make the choice to be in proximity of someone, not be in proximity of someone. So it's still an ones. So Shabbos, say, isn't this fascinating? So the type of kohen for whom we'll send home truma is a kohen who is a victim of an absolutely, totally, and unequivocally unavoidable circumstance. That's an ones. That's an ones. But a kohen who's, again, he became tamei because of a result of circumstances that he did not plan for, but was not totally avoidable. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, we're not sending truma home for him. I will say, by the way, what a profound musar haska, what a profound lesson for us as well. In life, things happen. Things happen. And I will say, while it's true that there's a big category of things that you did not anticipate, did not plan for, or beyond your control, these are really two different sets of circumstances. There are things that you mamish do not control. Circumstances that are visited upon you that have nothing to do with the choices you have made. They've been foisted upon you. We'll say those type of circumstances, you get a pass. When I say you get a pass, you have to navigate them. But Lamaisa, there's no culpability for that. But I will say, if we think about it, if we're honest with ourselves if we're honest with ourselves in life, many times we find ourselves in compromised circumstances, but if we're honest, we allowed ourselves to get there. Maybe I didn't put myself there, right? Maybe I did not actively choose this, but Lamaisa, I made a whole bunch of smaller decisions that allowed me to come to this place. For that, you can't claim ones. For that, I have to own it. For that, I have to recognize that my decisions led me to this particular circumstance. And I have to own that fact. I can't claim ones rachmana patri. I can't claim ones because it's not full ones. I made the decisions that got me here. And I will say it's so important because so often in life, we encounter circumstances and we like to play the ones card. Right? Not my fault. Not my fault. You're right. Technically, it's not your fault. This particular situation right now is not your fault. but how did I get here? How did I get here? And even though this last kind of event is not my fault, I allowed myself to be in this set of circumstances that then allowed this last event to occur, even though I did not do it. And it's so important to live life with that heightened sense of awareness and vigilance. There's ones, nafish ones. You could be an RL, you could be a tameh. RL are those circumstances totally beyond your control. You get a pass for those. Tameh are those circumstances, maybe some element beyond your control, but I have to be honest and ask myself, what did I do to contribute to this set of circumstances? Let's go back to TORAH Banon. So the Brisa says, Eved and Isha, we do not give them truma in the granary. And I both say, here's what's strange. But in a place where we give a woman first. So I'll say that's inherently contradictory. You just said we don't give an Eved and an Isha's Kohen, truma, right? But wherever you do give them, you give the woman first. So the Gemara says, "My kamar, what does that mean?" Haki kamar, no. B'makom shecholkin meiser ani. Not talking about truma. So I'm sorry. The first part is about truma. So I will say, so the Brisa says two things. Number one, we don't give truma to a woman. Okay, Isha's Kohen, we've established. But with meiser ani, which is a tithe for the poor, we do give to a woman. And not only that, if a woman shows up, right, with a man, unrelated man, we go ahead and we give meiser ani to the woman first. My time, what's the reason? Mishum zilusa, because ultimately, again, I will say, because halacha l'maisa, it's not nice for a woman to have to wait. And I will say it's a little thing that also is very often lost in contemporary society, which is called chivalry, right? Let women go first. I once had this, by the way. I got such a mishaberach from someone one time, not the good kind of mishaberach, right? By mechiras chametz. So there was a group of men waiting to sell their chametz, and a woman walked in. And I said to him, and I said, you know what? It's okay. Nobody minds if you go and you come first. Took her first for mechiras chametz. A few moments later, a guy comes in afterwards. He says, nobody minds? I mind. I don't understand. We live in an age, men and women are equal. Why are you taking her first? So what I wanted to say was, how's your marriage? Right? How are things at home? Right? Because, and what was your chinuch like? Right? That no one ever taught you? Just a basic additional derech eretz. Right? It's for women that, especially here, you're sitting in a shul. It's a whole bunch of men. One woman coming in. It's just interesting. So just to point out again. So the Gemara says, take the woman first, right? So a woman shows up for meiser ani, go ahead and give her the meiser ani. But makom shechol ke meiser ani nosin leisha tchila. My taima mishum zilusa. Because why should a woman have to wait with a whole group of men? Go ahead and take her first. So Moshe is incredible. Amar Rav said, Mereisha ki hava asu gavra ve'isoladina kamai. Let's listen to this. So Rav said, in the beginning, so Rav was talking about in his beis din. In my beis din, so when a man or a woman would come for a din Torah, so we'll say, unrelated, in other words, a woman was coming with her din Torah, right, her legal case, and a man was coming with his legal case. So Rav said, Havi sharina tigra de gavra v'reisha. I always used to take the case of the man first. Why? Both said this is fascinating. Why? Because I said to myself, Amina te mechayi b'mitzvos. Because I figured a man should take precedence. Why should a man take precedence over a woman? Because a man is chayiv in more mitzvahs than a woman is. Makes sense, right? A man has greater level of halachic obligation than a woman does. Right? A woman is exempt from mitzvahs, shazman, gramatai, mitzvahs. So Rabbi said, therefore, I would always assumed that I should adjudicate the man first out of deference to the fact that he has more mitzvahs than a woman. So the Gemara says, however, kevan de shamar laha sharina tigr de isav. But once I heard this halacha, I always take women first in the beis din. My taima mishum zilusa. Ultimately, again, what's the reason? So that it shouldn't be a degradation for the woman to have to wait for a din Torah. Let's say quite fascinating. Good, let's go back there. Higdila taruva. So we'll say, remember again, let's go back to the Mishnah. So back to the Mishnah's case of the Kohenes and the Shivcha who had boys, and what happened? We're not sure whose baby is who. So the children grow up. So remember again, the Mishnah then said, Higdila ta'aruvos v'shikru ze'ezeh. When the boys grew up, and they emancipated each other. So I will say, the way the Mishnah is worded it makes it sound like if they want to emancipate one another, they can. Shikru iboy in ilo boylo. So I will say, it sounds like if they want to emancipate one another, they can. V'amai. So I'll say, how could emancipation even if it has to be mandatory? Why? Lisa shivcha eni yachol, baskarin eni yachol. So I will say, because if they don't emancipate each other, then what? These boys are stuck. Why are they stuck? Because they're each a safek kohen, safek eved. So they can't marry. There's no one for them to marry. So the Gemara says, Amarava ema kofin osano mushachrin zez. Rava says, no, read it as we force them to emancipate each other. They have to emancipate each other because that mutual emancipation is the only way that they have the ability to get married. Beautiful. No snaleim chumrei. So I will say, so remember again, not only that, but halacha l'maisi, even once they emancipate each other, remember again, I will say, now there's still a suffix. What's the suffix? Now they've emancipated each other. What's the suffix? Kohen Yisroel. So good news, right? At least now it's no longer a suffix of Kohen Eved. It's Kohen Yisroel, but it's still a suffix. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, what do? We put upon them the chumras of the kahuna. So it says the Gemara, l'may hilchasa. So I'll say, what does it mean practically that we put upon them the chumras of the kahuna? So I will say, so remember again, I just want to point out, the Gemara is actually drawing our attention to the last line of the Mishnah. Because if you notice, by the way, the Mishnah went through, what does it mean to be a chumras? We know what it means to have the chumras of a kohen. You can't become tamei, right? But at the same time, you don't go ahead and get sacrificial offerings, right? But yet the Mishnah felt compelled at the end. If you look at the last line of the Mishnah, on 99b on Sadik Testimonies, the Mishnah said, "V'noslin alav chumrei kohanim b'chumrei Yisraelim." Shabbos say we put upon them the stringencies of the Kohen and the stringencies of a Yisrael. That line seems to be extraneous and unnecessary. Shabbos says, so why do you need it? So this is fascinating. So the Ma'ilchas, Shabbos say, obviously the Mishnah is coming to teach us something additional. So Shabbos say, look how riveting this is. So the Ma'ilchas, so Amra Papa. Leminchasam. Wow. Well, so listen to this. The last line of the Mishnah is teaching me, what do you do with the mincha of this particular person? This Safek Kohen, Safek Yisrael. I will say very quickly, right? Hilchos Menachos 101. If the Yisrael offers up a mincha, what happens? Remember again, Kohen takes a kamitza, middle three fingers, scoops up the flour. That's offered up on the Mizbeach. What happens to the rest of the mincha? Eaten by the Kohanim. What happens if a Kohen offers up a mincha? Totally burnt on the Mizbeach. So watch how fascinating this is. So what happens now? This guy, who's our guy? Safek guy. Now he's a Safek Kohen, Safek Yisrael. He shows up to the Mikdash. He wants to offer up a karban mincha. So what is that? Is that a minchas Kohen or a minchas Yisrael? Says the Gemara, that's when the Mishnah means when it says, Noslin alav chumrei kohanim v'chumrei Yisrael. Watch this. So interesting. What do we do with the mincha of this guy? Watch this. Nikmetzes keminchas Yisrael. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a kamitza from it, like it's a regular minchas Yisrael. So we'll take a mincha, but ve'ena le'achelas keminchas hakahanim. But Abba say, but you can't eat it. So what we'll do is we'll take the kamitza, in case ultimately, again, he's really Yisrael. But we won't have the Kohanim eat the rest of the mincha in case what? He's a Kohen. Okay. So Rabbi says, HaKetzad. So what do you do with it? So watch this. HaKometz kari ba'atzma, v'ashrayim kari b'matzman. So I'll say, what do? You offer up the kamitza, and then by itself, and then after you offer up the kamitza, you'll burn the rest of the mincha on the mizbeach as well. Beautiful. That way, it's the chumrah of a Kohen, chumrah of a Yisrael. Gemara says, 1 second, you can't do that. Ikri kan kol shemimenu liishim harehu bebal taktiru. But Abba say there's a halach in karbanos. What's halach in karbanos? That in a karban, if there's a particular part that has to be offered up on the mizbeach, you're not allowed to burn any additional parts. So once you're going ahead and offering up a kamitza, right, the 3 fingers breadth, you're not allowed to burn the rest of that mincha. So how is this a suitable solution? Rabbi Shimon Pazi, the masiklu l'shum eitzim. Rabbi said it's fascinating. What are you doing? When we say Rabbi, so again, in general, what that means is like this. If you're going to go ahead and take a kamitza from this mincha, and you're going to burn that kamitza, the burning of the kamitza precludes you from burning the rest of the mincha as a mincha. So, but what can you do? You could burn the rest of the mincha as what? As eitzim, as wood. So I'm not burning the rest of the mincha as a karban mincha. I'm burning the rest of the mincha as eitzim, as wood. And I both say what that allows me to do is cover all of my bases. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar Omer, l'reach nichoach yatama'ala aval atama'ala l'shum eitzim. You can't offer up. I say, in other words, so once you have a carbon that has a defined part that needs to be offered on the mizbeach, you can't just offer up other additional pieces on the mizbeach. But what you can do is, if you need to burn other pieces for some reason, like in this particular case, you could offer it up as eitzim, as wood. So I will say, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is that halacha l'maisa, when this Safek Kohen, Safek Yisroel shows up in the Beis HaMikdash, and he wants to offer up a karban mincha, so again, because we don't know, is he Yisroel, and therefore kamitza, and the rest of it is eaten by a Kohen, or is he a Kohen, it's all burnt on the Mizbeach. So what are we going to do? We're going to leverage our risk. We're going to offer up the mincha, we're going to offer up the kamitza, burn that on the Mizbeach, and then we're going to burn the rest of the mincha as well. But you can't burn the rest of the mincha as a mincha, because once you've burned the kamitza, you can't burn the rest. So what do? We'll burn the rest of the mizbeach, we'll burn the rest of the mincha on the mizbeach, but not as a mincha, as what? As what? Eitzim, wood. To which the Gemara says, okay, hanichal Rabbi Elazar. That works according to Rabbi Elazar. But according to the Rabbanon, what would they say in this case? Da'avid leik Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. They would conduct themselves like Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. What do Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon say? Disanya, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Omer, hakomeis karav liatzmo, v'hashirayim mispazrin abeis hadeshan. So I will say, there's another opinion over here. You see, the Rabbanon disagree. They hold that halacha l'maisa, we are not allowed to burn the leftover part of a carbon as eitzim, as wood. So what would they do with the leftover part of this mincha? So ultimately, again, they would hold that it could be scattered on the Beis Hadeshen. So I will say the Beis Hadeshen is the ash pile. So I will say, but even the Rabbanon only argue on Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon on the minchas chote of a kohen, because that has to be fully offered. However, aval hacha, but I will say in this case over here, we're talking about a mincha that is brought by a Safek Kohen, Safek Yisrael, afilu Rabbanon modu. Ultimately, again, even the Rabbanon would agree that halacha l'maisa can be spread out on the Beis Hadeshen. So bottom line, halacha l'maisa, what the Gemara is saying is like this, is that in this case of Safek Kohen, Safek Yisrael, when the Mishnah ends off and says, V'nostin alav chumrei kohen v'chumrei Yisraelim, we put upon him the chumras of a kohen, chumras of the Yisrael. So Rabbi say, even though that line seems redundant, it's not redundant. It's coming to address a very specific issue, which is the issue of mincha. So when this guy shows up in the mikdash and we wants to offer up a karban mincha, so remember again, we don't know what to do with his mincha. If he's a Yisrael, you offer up a kometz and the kohanim eat the rest. If he's a kohen, you totally burn it. So what do we do with this guy? We're going to offer up his kometz and then we're going to burn the rest of the mincha as well. How are you going to burn the rest of the mincha? So that's a machlokes. Either you're going to burn it on the mizbeach, l'shum eitzim, or you're going to scatter it on the ash pile. Either way, you're going to find a way to go ahead and burn the rest of the mincha. Beautiful. Rabbi said, let's go back to Mishnah. So Rabbi say, very interesting case. So let's say now what happened. A woman, her husband died, or divorced, whatever the situation is. Right, so we'll say, or yibum, for that matter, again, but she didn't wait 3 months. See, normally we'll say what we've established is, you need to wait a minimum of 3 months in between marriages. Why? Because this way, if she becomes pregnant immediately, we need to know, is it a 7th month baby for husband number 1, or a 9-month baby for husband number 2? So let's say now here the situation Abu says the woman did not wait. She didn't wait. So we'll say, so now I have a situation. She didn't wait. She gives birth 7 months after her second marriage. So now we don't know, is this a 9-month baby for husband number 1, or a 7-month baby for husband number 2. Okay, now we'll say what happens. Hayula banim min harishon ubanim min hasheni. Then Rabbi say, in addition to this woman in question also has additional children from husband number 1 and husband number 2. So we'll say, so just to frame this for just a moment, Rachel was married to Reuven. What happened over here? What happened? Reuven died. Rachel had kids with Reuven. She had 2 kids with Reuven. Okay, now she marries Shimon, but she marries Shimon just a couple of weeks. They met at the Levaya, chemistry. Chemistry is chemistry, right? So we'll say, so Lemaisa again, right? So what happens? She marries Shimon, and now what happens? She has a kid with Shimon, right? 7 months, well, I should say, after marrying Shimon, 7 months later, she has a son. So now we'll say, we don't know, is that son, right? Is that son? Who is that, right? Who is that? Now we'll say, now in addition to that, she has more kids with Shimon. So I'll say now, so Rachel has 2 kids with Reuven, 2 kids with Shimon. When I say 2 kids who are definitively Reuven's, 2 kids who are definitively Shimon's. There's this other kid, right? The typical middle child syndrome, right? So this is amplified middle child syndrome over here, right? We're not even sure. I will say, is it Reuven's kid? Is it Shimon's kid? So I will say, so now what happens? So now you know where this case is going. So I will say, so how you love banim min harishon banim min hasheni? So now I will say, so now let's say again. I will say, so now what happens? So now let's say halacha l'maisa. We'll just call this middle child. Middle child's brothers die, or a brother dies. Now both say it doesn't really matter which brother, right? Whether it's brothers, half brothers from Reuven or half brothers from Shimon. Either way, Rabbi say, what is middle child going to do? So the halacha is chotzav v'lo miyabmin. Ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, they're going only yibum and chalitza. I'm sorry, only chalitza and not yibum. V'chein hu lahem cholitz v'lo miyabim. So I will say, whoever's dying in this situation, whether it's the brothers from Reuven, the brothers from Shimon, or the middle son himself, because we don't know definitively who's related to who from a paternal perspective. Again, it's a suffix, and therefore all you could do ultimately is chalitza in these cases. Amadeus. Hayulo acha min harishon ve'acha min hasheni shalome osaim. Rabbi say, what happens if halacha l'maisa? Right, he has brothers. Right, acha min harishon, acha min hasheni. So we'll see this case in this schema. Look at Rashi over here. Leishes ben harishonim achavhu haretov ve'imlav nochris yetzlo. So we'll say, let's see, he has brothers. Ultimately, again, from the first one, acha min hasheni shalome osaim, not the same mother. Who cholitz miyabim veheim echad cholitz ve'echad miyabim. So ultimately, again, if he's the one who dies, then they do chalitza or yibum. But ultimately, again, he, right, if one of the brothers died, he does chalitza and yibum. Who echad cholitz ve'echad miyabim. One could do chalitza, one could do yibum. Haya echad Yisroel ve'echad kohen. If one of them ultimately again was a Yisroel, one of them was a kohen. No se isha ru'iyah l'kohen. Ultimately, again, can marry a woman who is fit to the kahuna. Ve'imet tamil mesim can't become tamil mesim, because I will say this would be the case. Remember again. I'm sorry. Let's go back for just a second. Haya echad Yisroel ve'echad kohen. I will say refers to the fact, going back to our original case. Rachel was married to Reuven, got divorced or whatever. Reuven died. She got married very quickly afterwards, less than 3 months to Shimon. Now they have a son. Is it a 7-month baby to Shimon, or is it a 9-month baby to Reuven? So I will say, so again, let's say Reuven was a Kohen and Shimon was not. So what do I do in this case? So I Yisrael ve'echad Kohen, no se isha ru'iyah l'kohen. So I will say, so therefore the child, the suffix child, is going to have to marry a woman who is fit for a coin. He can't become tamil mesim. But if he does become tamil, he doesn't get malka. So we'll say this is exactly what we saw before. Because we'll remember again in this case, remember one more time. Rachel was married to Reuven. Reuven was a coin. Reuven dies. 3 weeks later, she gets married to Shimon. Or let's say even a month later, she gets married to Shimon. 2 months later, she gets married to Shimon. Right? Shimon's not a Kohen. 7th month later, she has a baby. What's our suffix? Is this kid? We'll call him just Yehuda. Right? Is Yehuda Reuven's son or Shimon's son? Now we've just upped the ante. So beforehand, we were speaking about, again, in terms of Yibum and Chalitza. Now we've upped the ante again. Reuven was a Kohen, Shimon was not. So what's the shayla? is Yehuda Kohen. So we've already established in this case, Yehuda is a Safek Kohen. We're going to have to give him all the chumras of a Kohen and the chumras of a Yisroel. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, he has to marry a woman who's fit for the kahuna. When Yehuda grows up, he can't marry a grusha. He has to marry a woman who's fit for the kahuna. Not only that, he can't become tamei l'meis. Can't go to levaya. But if he does become tamei, even intentionally, we can't give him malchus. Why can't we give him malchus? Why not? Maybe he's a Yisroel. Right? He can't eat truma, because maybe he's a maybe he's not. If he does eat truma, we can't penalize him. See, normally if the Yisrael eats truma, what's the halacha? He has to pay principal plus a penalty fifth. He can't impose this upon this kid. Why not? Why not? He may not be a Kohen. And ultimately, again, if he shows up at the granary, we don't give him a portion. We'll say first white line, kuf on the base. This is fascinating. What could Yehuda, right? When Yehuda separates out truma, so we'll say he can't eat his own truma, right? He can't eat truma. What can he do? He could sell it, and what could he do with the money? He could keep it. Now we'll say, why could he keep it? Another Kohen goes over to him and says, hey Yehuda, you're not a real Kohen. Yehuda says, prove it. Prove it. You want to extract truma money from me? No problem. Prove that I'm not a Kohen. Good. But I will say he obviously does not get a portion of sacrificial meat, right, or hides. He doesn't get any kachim, right? Again, that refers to the hides or anything else. This goes back to yesterday's Mishnah. If Yehuda shows up at the Beis Hamikdash and wants to offer up a karban, as much as we can't allow him to offer it up, he can choose who offers it up. In other words, the Kohanim who are on shift, right, don't have the right to claim the right to offer it. He has the right to designate whichever Kohen he wants. Upater min hazroa umin alechayim ba'akeva. He does not have to give the jaw, the foreleg, and the stomach. Those are Kohanic portions. He can keep them for himself. Ubechor yeroa achi yistaiv. And I will say, if he has a Bechor animal, so normally Bechor Behema goes to the Kohen. So this kid Yehuda, he can go ahead and keep his Bechor animal. Now he can't eat it because he's a Safek Kohen, but he can allow it to graze until it develops a mum. And after it develops a mum, he can go ahead and keep it. We're going to give him the Chumras of a Kohen Chumras of Yisrael. Shabbos say, okay, good. Next case. Hayu Shneim Kohanim. So we'll say now, next case is back for a second. Reuven and Shimon are both Kohanim. Rachel married Shimon, right? 2 months after the death of Reuven. Now there's a baby. Is the baby Yehuda, is baby Yehuda a 9-month baby of Reuven or a 7th-month baby of Shimon? Now in this case, I will say, both Reuven and Shimon are Kohanim. So therefore, in this case, what's Yehuda's status? He's a Kohen. Well, actually, we'll see. Hayushtem Kohanim who onin aleim mehem onin alav. So we'll say now, again, in this case, Yehuda will observe aninos for both fathers, for both Reuven and Shimon, and they are an onin on him. So I will say, remember again, if you're a Kohen, the status of aninos precludes you from eating anything that's kodesh. So they will observe aninos for him, he will observe aninos for them. Hu eino metame lahem, ve'eino metame lo. So I will say, but here's what's interesting. Yehuda can't become tamei for either Reuven or Shimon. Why? Why not? He doesn't know who his father is. Right? It's a safek. They cannot become tamei for him. Why not? Because at the end of the day, halacha l'maisa, right? So I will say, by the way, I know I framed this as a case where Reuven died already. So again, we're going to see this doesn't have to be a case of where Reuven died. It could also be a case of where Reuven divorced Rachel. We'll see. The point over here is there's a safek. In this case, both of the fathers, potential fathers, both Reuven and Shimon are both Kohanim. So in this case, there's no kahuna doubt about Yehuda, right? Yehuda is a Kohen. We're just not sure who his father is. So therefore, I will say again, who einu metame lem, he can't become tamei for them because Lamaisa, again, he's not sure which one of his is his father. Vehein einu metame lo. And ultimately, again, they cannot become tamei for him because neither of them knows definitively which one is his father. Hu einu yoresh osam. He does not inherit either of them because Lamaisi is not sure which is his father. Avalheim yarshim oso. But I will say, interestingly enough, they, Reuven and Shimon, inherit Yehuda. Now, what does it mean when they inherit Yehuda? Let's say Yehuda dies without children. Right? So what's the halacha? So we'll say if a son dies without children, who inherits the son? The father. Now in this case, again, we don't know who the father is. So what'll happen with the Yerusha? Reuven and Shimon will split it. They'll split it. Upater amakaso va'al kilalaso shalzeh v'shalzeh. So say interestingly enough, if Yehuda were to go ahead and hit Reuven or Shimon, remember again, the halacha is normally one is chayiv for striking or for cursing their father. In this case, Reuven would be pater. Why would Reuven be pater? Yehuda. Why would Yehuda be pater? Why? He doesn't know who his father is. Okay, Oleb mishmaro shalzeh v'shalzeh. So we'll say, interestingly enough, now remember, in this case, Yehuda is definitely a Kohen. So we'll say, what's the shaila? Who's mishmar? Right? Whose grouping does he belong to? Does he belong to Reuven's mishmar, Shimon's mishmar? And the answer is yes. He belongs to both mishmaros. However, ve'eno cholek. Then I will say, here's what's interesting. So he can serve in the mikdash with the mishmar of either Reuven or Shimon or both of them. But what can't he get? He can't get a portion of the hides or of the meat with either of those respective mishmaros. Why not? Because the other members of the mishmar could say to Yehuda, prove to us that you're really a member of this mishmar. It's an interesting piece over here. If it happened to be that Reuven and Shimon were both, not only both Kohanim, but both what? Both part of the same mishmar, then in that case, Yehuda not only goes ahead and could worship or could participate in the same mishmar, but could also demand Kohanic portions as part of that mishmar. That must have been an awkward week for Yehuda, right? But Lamaisa, it works from a sacrificial portion perspective. Good. Says the Gemara. So we'll say, going back to the case of Ibn Chalisa, Tafka Michlatz V'Hadur Yibume Ava Yivume B'Rei Shalo Tekapage B'Yivam. So we'll say, so remember again, in general, in any of these cases of doubt, whenever the Mishnah prescribes the idea of chalitza and then yibum, the order is always specific. In any of these cases of doubt, chalitza always has to happen first. Yibum could only happen at the end, because if you go ahead and you start with yibum, it could very well be that you're marrying a woman who really is subject to yibum and you're not the yavam. Good. Amr Shavas, an interesting case. Asara kohanim omdim upirish echamenu baal havlad shtuki. So we'll say, watch this case. You have a group of 10 Kohanim. One of them leaves the group and impregnates a woman. So we'll say, now the woman has a child. The Gemara says, that baby is a shtuki. Then I will say, remember again, what's a shtuki? A shtuki is a baby whose paternity is unknown. Right? It's the baby who talks about, whenever he talks about his father, his mother says, shh. Right? His mother silences him. So therefore, the baby is a shtuki. So the Gemara says, okay, let's analyze this. My shtuki, so if we say it's a case where halacha lemaisa, we don't allow the child has no entitlement to the property of a father, that's obvious. Pshita, miya dinan avuamana. Remember again, the case is where I know the father is one of this group of 10, but what? We don't know who. So obviously, the kid has no entitlement to any property, to any inheritance, because we don't know who his father is. What does it mean when we say he's a shtuki? Elo shemeshaskin osami din kahuna. Wow. Right, I will say what shtuki means over here is we silence him in that the child is not a Kohen. Not a Kohen. My time, I will say this is fascinating. My time, Amakra, v'haisalo l'zarach harav. So I will say, because the pasuk we're talking about, the kahuna says, v'haisalo, it'll be to Aaron, u'l'zar'o acharav, and to his offspring after him. Ba'inon zaro miyuchas acharav. See, I will say, to be a Kohen, it's not simply enough to know that your father is Kohen. What do you have to know? You have to know who your father is. You have to know. So I'll say it's a fascinating drush in the pasuk. Zaro acharov means I know who my father is. Once I know who my father is, then what? I could be a Kohen. So it's fascinating. So it's not enough to know that in general your father was a Kohen, but rather what? You must know specifically who was your father. And therefore, again, that's lacking in this case. One second, Papa. What about by Avraham Avinu? It says, I'm going to be to you for God and to your offspring after you. Hasam mai kamas yule rachmana. So I will say, what does zaracha acharecha mean by Avraham Avinu? What does it mean by Avraham Avinu? To which the Gemara says, Hachikam, what it means to say, Lo tinasev ovedes kochavim v'shivcha, de lo lezel zaracha basra. So I will say, ultimately, again, what does it mean? What does it mean? It means that by Avraham Avinu, it means something a little bit different. It means, don't marry a non-Jewish woman, because if you marry a non-Jewish woman, ovedes kochavim or a shivcha, the child is going to be hers and not yours. So I will say, okay, so the point over here is, by kahuna, we just saw this brand new concept. What's this brand new concept? That Allah Chalamaisa, in order to be a Kohen, you really need what? Zaracha acharecha. And zaracha acharecha means what? What? You know who your father is. So here's the problem. Meisvei, Shabbos say, Meisvei, Rishon Roy Lios Kohen Gadol. So let's remember again, we had this particular Mishnah. If you look at Rashi, actually Rishon Roy Lios Kohen Gadol, Hecha Shemiyabim Eishes Achiv B'soch Gimel V'yalda. So I'll say this was the case of premature yibum, right? So Reuven dies, leaves behind the widow, no children, and now Shimon does yibum. But Shimon did yibum after 2 months. Then what happens? They have a child. So 7 months later, there's a baby. So we'll say, what's the shayla? Is this Reuven's kid or is this Shimon's kid? Now let's say we're talking about a family of Kohanim. What did we say? This baby is fit to be a Kohen Gadol. But one second, what's the problem? We don't know who the father is. There's no Zaro Acharav. So the Gemara says, V'haba inon Zaro miyuchas acharav aleka. So it's very Zaro miyuchas acharav d'Rabbanan. The need for defined paternity by a Kohen is only a din d'Rabbanan. Ukras machta ba'alma. And Zaracha Acharav will say it's not a real drasha, it's an asmachta. So we'll say, when would the Rabbanon goes there? The Chikaz Rabbanon biznus, the Rabbanon will only goes there, we'll say, in a case of znus. In a case of immorality, that's when we kind of throw the book. Right? We'll say, like this case, 10 Kohanim, one separates, impregnates a woman, right, has a baby. We don't know who the father is. In a case like that, we're going to say that kid is a shtuki. That kid is not a Kohen. Why? No zaracha, no zarachara. B'nisuin lo gaz rabbanon. But it will say in a case of nisuin, in that case the rabbanon will not go there, and therefore Allah Chalamaisa will say in any case of legitimate nisuin, even though there is some level of paternal ambiguity, if both of the fathers in question are Kohanim, ultimately what? The kid is going to be a Kohen as well. The Gemara says, 1 second, Ubiznus migaz rabbanon. Is it true that in a case of znus, the rabbanon were gozer, and when there is paternal ambiguity, the child will not be a Kohen? What about our Mishnah? V'hatinan mishlosha sa'achar bayla shlosha chadasha v'niseis the yalda. If a woman did not wait after her first husband, this is our Mishnah. A woman did not wait after her first husband the requisite 3 months, and she married and she had a baby. Rabbi say again, we said in our Mishnah that if both husbands are both men are Kohanim, halacha l'maisa, the offspring is a Kohen. My achar baila. What's the case of achar baila, Bosai? Ilema achar misas baila. If you're talking about it's a case ultimately where a husband died. Ema seifa. Look at the case. Look at the seifa. Who onin alei mehein enam onin achar alav. Ultimately, again, he is an onain. Right? He is an onain for them, and they are owning him for him. Bishlama who onain alei mishkachas labinisu desheni v'likat atzamas tekama. You know what? We'll stop over here. We'll pick up again with this discussion. And I will say, so now what we just left off with, I will say, is the fascinating discussion again. Kohen, the Gemara wanted to suggest needs zaro acharav, needs defined yichus. So the shaila ultimately is again, is that a case in defined yichus? Maybe not by marriage, but only by znus, or maybe even by znus you don't need it. To be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach.